Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined, they're real. Kansas City, Missouri. Wednesday, August 6, 2025, early evening. A quiet stretch of Morrell Avenue ruptures with rapid gunfire. Neighbors retreat from their windows. On a front lawn, a woman is down and unresponsive. A dark pickup has been seen angling across a driveway moments before the shots. Responding officers establish a perimeter, push onlookers back, and call out the grid for evidence collection. They start with what never lies: surfaces, distances, angles, and time. The scene is outdoors and singular: yard, driveway, curb. Technicians photograph the body position, mark each casing with numbered tints, and log wind, light, and camera vantage points from nearby homes. Early counts place the casings at approximately 21, consistent with .40 caliber ammunition, distributed in two tight clusters with a short interval between them. That interval matters. A reload cadence can be measured, later matched to the pattern of wounds and the route of approach. A chain of custody form begins traveling from tint to clipboard to sealed bag. A doorbell camera is located across the street. The clip shows a pickup rolling in at a shallow angle, a brief contact event, a stop, and multiple muzzle flashes. The shooter's movements are partly occluded by a parked vehicle, but the behavior is legible: approach, impact, fire, reload, fire, depart. Plate clarity is insufficient in the raw file. Enhancement and cross-cam synchronization are scheduled. Investigators lock the camera's internal clock against official time, note the drift, and preserve the original file on evidence media. The neighborhood map is annotated to reflect possible ingress and egress routes within minutes of the event. Identification follows protocol. The victim is confirmed as Brazen Kane, 42, a teacher, mother of 5, and pregnant. Her name is used respectfully and sparingly. The focus remains on what can be verified. Medics pronounce at scene. The medical examiner's team documents external injuries, photographs clothing condition, and prepares transport for autopsy. No assumptions are recorded about motive. No narratives are attached to grief. Officers canvass within a defined radius. Several residents report hearing more than a dozen shots in two bursts. One mentions a dark Ford-style pickup, another recalls headlamps flaring at the driveway mouth just before the first series of flashes. The statements are consistent but not identical, exactly what investigators expect when people describe the same event from different angles and stress levels. Notes are timestamped. Contact information is secured for follow-up interviews once video review and ballistic screening advance. By midnight, the scene log catalogs the core evidence set: casing clusters, trajectory markers, vehicle track impressions at the apron of the drive, and video sources identified. Nothing is speculated into the record. Nothing is softened. This is the starting point of a homicide inquiry with an intimate partner profile flagged for review, but the file reads in neutral terms until charges change its posture. In neighborhoods like historic Northeast, murders don't just tally on a map, they tear fabric. The job here is to stitch facts tight enough that they hold. Kansas City's historic Northeast moves on a reliable rhythm: school pickups, grocery runs, porch lights at dusk. Within that rhythm, Brazen Kane, 42, kept a predictable schedule: work responsibilities, 5 kids to manage, prenatal appointments on the calendar. Friends described the last week as busy but ordinary. Investigators log that as baseline. In cases like this, the story starts with who the victim was and how her days usually looked, because deviation is where leads begin. Detectives reconstruct the window leading into the evening of August 6, 2025. They collect timestamps from routine touchpoints: when neighbors typically see her car in the driveway, when a porch light usually flips on, when deliveries tend to hit the block. They coordinate those ordinary cues with available phone metadata and neighborhood camera clocks that were synced at the scene. The objective is narrow: place the victim, identify expected movements, then mark anything that breaks pattern. One anchor is her recent decision to end a relationship. That fact sits in the record as context, not conclusion. It means investigators widen their canvas to people who knew her well and people who might still have access to her front yard, driveway, or day-to-day habits. The team conducts short, focused interviews. When was the last in-person conversation? Any notice of a vehicle lingering on the street earlier in the week? Whether she expressed concerns about being followed or watched. Responses are documented without speculation, and only those details corroborated by timestamped sources move forward. The pregnancy is noted in official paperwork. That status matters for risk assessment, not for narrative effect. Pregnancy can increase vulnerability in intimate partner cases, which is why investigators verify appointment logs and transportation to and from those locations. The checks are practical: clinic visit times, potential rides, and whether any camera along those routes captured a pickup matching the general shape and color described later at the scene. When footage exists, it's cataloged. When it doesn't, notes reflect the gap instead of guessing. The neighborhood audit is methodical. Earlier in the week, a resident reports seeing a dark pickup creeping past the block more than once around twilight. Another mentions unusual headlight angles near a driveway mouth on a prior night. These statements are not identical. They shouldn't be. What matters is overlap that can be tested against clocks and angles. Investigators diagram viewpoints, then ask the same targeted follow-ups a day later to see if memory holds under repetition. Consistency under time strengthens utility. Drift pushes a statement to the background until physical evidence supports it. The team also reviews digital behavior around the home. Smart doorbells, exterior motion lights, and basic home routers can create a footprint of normal activity: motion at certain hours, short clips triggered by neighborhood cats, data pings that align with porch steps. In the 72 hours before the homicide, nothing stands out as an obvious prelude: no documented trespass, no recorded confrontation. If there were heated communications, they're not quoted here. This account stays with what's in public records and what investigators can verify without sensational details. Through all of this, the timeline remains clean. Workday behaviors appear routine. Children's schedules follow the usual pattern. There is no documented call for service to the address in the days immediately preceding the homicide. If family or friends raised concerns, those concerns are captured as statements, not as proof. The focus stays on time, on what happened when, where ordinary life ends and criminal conduct begins. By late night on August 6th, officers can do what matters at this stage: lock the victim's last confirmed normal window. That lock makes the driveway arrival in the video more significant. It transforms what the camera saw into a disruption of pattern rather than a random act. 1 yard, 1 driveway, 1 sequence of approach and gunfire against a life that, by every verified indicator, had run predictably until it didn't. The human stakes are plain without being dramatized: 5 children, a teacher, a pregnancy, and a neighborhood that now has a timestamp for when ordinary stopped. Sometimes the data aligns almost too cleanly. That's when investigators slow down and check the clocks again. The lawn on Morrell Avenue is quiet again by morning, but the measurements remain. Technicians return in daylight to verify what the night crew mapped under floodlights. They recheck distances from casing markers to the driveway edge, confirm camera angles, and lock the timestamps against an official clock so no second is guessed into the file. The aim is narrow: translate metal and geometry into sequence: what happened first, what followed, and how long the pause lasted between bursts. Casing clusters tell the story before anyone does. The first cluster sits closer to the driveway throat, a tight fan consistent with rounds fired within a short window. The second cluster tracks several feet away, slightly wider, suggesting movement during or immediately after a reload. Counting matters here. Approximately 21.40 caliber casings are recovered. The distribution creates a clean hinge point, a defined gap that reads as a reload cadence, not rumor. That gap becomes a working clock investigators can test against the doorbell video's muzzle flashes and the medical examiner's wound timeline. Trajectory work keeps emotion out of the equation. Investigators string provisional lines from casing positions toward the lawn, noting angles that match what the camera partially captured. The shooter exits the pickup after a low-speed contact event and fires at close range. A pause follows, firing resumes from a slightly shifted position near the curb. The camera's field of view is imperfect, Parked vehicles occlude parts of the action, but time, light, and recoil rhythm are reliable once synced. The phrase on the whiteboard is simple: approach, impact, fire, reload, fire, depart. Nothing more is written until each arrow is supported twice, by video and by metal on grass. The medical examiner's office works in parallel. Without graphic detail, the preliminary report aligns with multiple gunshot wounds at close distance. Skin-level indicators and clothing damage help position the victim relative to the muzzle during each burst. The reload gap appears again as pattern rather than speculation. Injuries cluster in two phases that mirror the casing split and the camera's flash cadence. This is what investigators want: independent lines converging. When three sources that do not talk to each other agree, probability hardens into a sequence that will hold in court. There are still controlled unknowns. The doorbell video's raw resolution limits plate readability. Lab requests for enhancement are logged, not promised. No assumption is entered about the exact handgun model. .40 SNW is a caliber, not a brand. On the driveway apron, tire impressions are photographed and cast, but they will remain comparative, not conclusive, until paired with a physical vehicle. These limits aren't shortcomings, they are the boundaries that keep a case credible. The file notes what the evidence can do and, just as clearly, what it can't. Canvas interviews from the previous chapter now gain specificity. A neighbor who described headlamps flaring near the driveway is re-interviewed with the casing map in view. Their line of sight matches the first cluster's position and the initial muzzle flashes on video. Another neighbor's account of a darker figure shifting toward the curb lines up with the second cluster. The statements are measured against the reload gap, not used to invent one. When words and physics agree, the statements move from interesting to useful. Throughout, the tone remains neutral. This is a homicide in Kansas City's historic Northeast with an outdoor scene, a pregnant victim, and a two-phase shooting sequence documented by physical evidence and camera time. That description is clinical by design. Families need accuracy more than adjectives. The neighborhood needs a record that won't fall apart when challenged. And the court will need a sequence built from things that don't change when opinions do. By the end of this phase, investigators have secured the backbone of the event. A vehicle approaches and makes contact. A shooter fires in two bursts separated by a short pause. The shooter leaves. The cadence of that pause, seconds, not minutes, will later anchor interviews, telephony checks, and any claim about where the shooter was when the second burst began. The data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem, one detective notes, not as a flourish, but as a reminder to keep rechecking the clocks, the angles, and every meter of ground. The human dimension doesn't vanish. It is present in the restraint. A lawn that carried a life now carries markers and string. The most respectful thing this chapter can do is keep those lines straight. Daylight makes the footage more usable, not because the camera changed, but because investigators now have fixed reference points to measure against. The doorbell video from Morrell Avenue is pulled frame by frame, its internal clock synced to an official time source. The silhouette shows a dark pickup easing into the driveway at a shallow angle, nose pointed slightly toward the curb line. Headlights sweep, then settle. There's a brief contact event at low speed. An individual exits on the driver's side and moves into the camera's partial field. Muzzle flashes follow, a short pause, and more flashes. After the second burst, the shooter returns toward the truck. The pickup reverses, straightens, and rolls off the block. What matters next is path. The team overlays a simple map of the 4000 block with likely ingress and egress vectors. Approach options here are limited by one-way patterns and speed calming features on side streets. The pickup's angle on the driveway suggests it entered from the nearer intersection, not the far end. You can see that in the headlight sweep, it paints the fence in a left-to-right arc that matches a turn-in from the same direction the neighbors reported vehicle movement earlier in the week. The departure looks controlled, not panicked, no spinning tires, no hard bounce over the curb. That steadiness helps when you're checking where it went next. Investigators canvass for additional cameras beyond the doorbell that caught the shooting. Not every house has one, and not every unit was recording. Where footage exists, it's preserved in original form, then duplicated for analysis. Even a 2-second clip at the edge of a frame matters. A reflection in a parked car's window can confirm direction of travel. A porch cam across the street might capture the truck's taillight spacing, which is different across model years. When no video exists, that absence is noted as a gap, not filled with guesses. Audio alignment becomes the second tool. The doorbell mic isn't broadcast quality, but it captures distinct bursts. Investigators compare the waveform timing with what the camera shows: flash, sound, gap, flash. They then check whether any other nearby devices recorded the same bursts. If a second mic clipped the tail end, you can calculate sound travel time and triangulate relative positions at the moment of gunfire. Here, the goal isn't reconstruction for a TV graphic, it's to confirm that the pickup and shooter positions seen on the main camera are consistent with what other devices in the area heard. When the numbers line up, confidence goes up. On the ground, the driveway apron shows subtle tire impressions near the throat of the drive. They're photographed and cast. Nobody writes match at this stage. Impressions can support a direction of travel call, turn-in angle, brief stop, reverse track, but they don't identify a specific vehicle by themselves. That restraint is important. Keeping the record clean means the same measurements you take now can stand later when a vehicle is located and examined. The team notes the tread characteristics and the distance between tracks where it's visible. If a suspect vehicle is ever seized, those values can be compared objectively. A traffic pattern check follows. Intersections within a short radius are reviewed for municipal cameras or private systems facing the right way at the right time. In many neighborhoods, these systems are either motion-triggered or on short retention windows. Requests go out fast, same day, because the clock on cloud deletions doesn't stop. When footage is retrieved, analysts look for a dark pickup whose movement window fits the minute-by-minute timeline anchored by the doorbell clip. Even a partial confirm, shape, ride height, light pattern, can cut the map in half, focusing later work on specific corridors. Back on Morel, the vehicle's behavior before and after the shooting reads as deliberate. There is no stall, no confusion about where to pull in or how to get out. That suggests familiarity with the property lines and the block's rhythm, where cars typically park, how close the fence sits to the driveway mouth, which way gets you to the nearest turn without doubling back. That observation isn't motive, it's geometry. If you know a driveway well enough to angle in and align cleanly on the first try at dusk, you've probably been there before. With the reload gap already established, the egress window is now a measurable slice of time. From the last flash to the moment the tail end drops out of frame, analysts count seconds. They compare that to the shortest plausible route to the closest intersection. If a secondary camera picks up a vehicle consistent with the pickup within that window, the chain tightens. If not, the report simply notes the absence and the reasons it may have occurred: camera angle, retention limits, or obstructions. Solid cases accept limits, they don't bend them. This is where a human line belongs, brief and honest. In towns like this, cameras don't tell you why. They tell you when and how. The rest is built from patient work, calls, records, and the kind of questions that hold up under oath. The choice to approach at that angle, to stop where the headlight sweep dies, to leave in a straight line without fishtailing, none of it proves identity by itself, but together it forms a footprint as distinct as a signature, measured in seconds and turns instead of ink. By the end of this phase, investigators have a clearer map, a probable approach direction, a documented stop and depart pattern, and a set of nearby cameras either preserved or ruled out. They have tire impressions cataloged for future comparisons and a synchronized audio-visual timeline that keeps the case grounded. No names are added here. The record stays disciplined: one scene, one sequence, one vehicle profile moving through a neighborhood that now has a timestamp for when ordinary ended. The scene work gave the case a spine. Now the file needs muscles, people, calls, and prior access that explain how a pickup could angle in and leave without hesitation. Detectives start with proximity: who could pull into that driveway without hunting for the curb line, who knew the porch light schedule, who understood where another car might sit at dusk. The aim isn't to speculate, it's to rank likelihoods and test them against records that don't change. Neighbors are recontacted with the verified timeline in hand. Each interview is short, built around timestamped prompts. Did you see a dark pickup idling near the intersection in the previous week? Do you recall headlamps sweeping the fence the night before the shooting? Two residents give similar accounts, separated by days and taken in separate rooms. Their overlap is narrow, vehicle type, angle, and the habit of slowing near the driveway mouth. That's all investigators need. Consistency at a basic level lets them move to sources that carry more weight than memory. Phone activity becomes the next lane. Investigators request and receive basic logs associated with a small circle of individuals who had regular contact with Brazen Kane in the weeks before August 6, 2025. They're not listening to content, they're looking at timing. Who called or texted near the hours the doorbell camera captured the approach, the pause, and the departure? Which numbers attempted contact in the hours after the shooting? Patterns emerge. One number spikes immediately after the event with a string of outgoing calls to family members. Those family members report the same thing independently. A man on the line acknowledged responsibility and spoke about harming himself. The reports are documented with times, not adjectives. Each call is a data point that can be set beside the reload gap and the window of departure. When they line up, the picture gets clearer. A photographic lineup is arranged with a witness who had enough daylight and distance to notice the driver earlier in the week. The process is controlled, standard instructions, filler images, and a quiet room. The witness selects one photo and signs the form. Investigators record the pic as a statement, not a verdict. Even strong identifications get filed alongside physical evidence, not above it. Meanwhile, the team interviews additional contacts who can answer a simpler question: who had reason to be on that block without drawing attention? More than one person says the same name. The statement phrasing stays careful: knew the property, had been by there, used that driveway before. Prior access matters when the vehicle behavior on video reads as practiced. On Morrill Avenue, technicians return to check the fence corner and gate swing with a tape and a level. The measurements confirm what the video suggested: a driver familiar with the space could set the nose, roll forward, and hold a line that puts the truck exactly where the first casing cluster later appeared. It's a small thing that pays off in court. Angles and distances let prosecutors talk about behavior without ever using the word intent. The report language stays plain. The approach was consistent with familiarity. In parallel, detectives run down the number tied to those post-incident calls. They document subscriber information, recent handset changes, and tower activity that places the device in the general vicinity at relevant times. This is not a GPS map, it's coverage that narrows possibilities. When they compare those times with the doorbell video and the second-by-second audio flashes, the intervals match. The man who called family right after the shooting appears to have moved when the pickup did. That convergence, logs, flashes, and seconds, pushes the case from person with context to person of interest. There's also the question of who still had access, real or perceived, after the relationship ended. Officers locate prior text threads and calendar entries that place the victim and this person in contact within weeks of the homicide. The tone of those messages isn't recited here. What matters is timing and proximity. A breakup in the recent past is recorded as context, not motive. In domestic violence homicides, context frames risk, but cases are carried by what can be measured: calls, clocks, angles, and where a truck's tires sat on concrete. With those strands in place, detectives coordinate with an outside agency to locate the person of interest. A vehicle consistent with the description surfaces outside Jackson County. Custody procedures follow policy, approach plan, safety checks, transport, and notification. Back in Kansas City, the case file updates a single line that matters to the narrative: someone is now in custody on a probable cause hold while prosecutors review the record. No name is used here because identification belongs with the charging decision, not with the lead-up. This phase includes one human sentence because it belongs. People who loved Brazen learned what had happened from calls they never wanted, and they repeated those words so the record would be accurate. That's the most difficult cooperation any family gives. The file treats it as evidence, because it is. By night's end, the investigative posture has shifted. The driveway angle and reload gap are no longer just geometry, they're part of a pattern tied to a phone, a prior presence, and a string of admissions reported by relatives. The story stays in one city, on one block, with a single sequence and a single case. No parallel plot lines. No second ending. Just a record moving from scene to person of interest in steps that can be defended later, under oath. 2 days after the shooting, the case moved from investigation to accusation. On August 8, 2025, Jackson County prosecutors filed charges, first-degree murder and armed criminal action. With those filings, the state publicly named a defendant, Arrell Dawkins, of Blue Springs, Missouri. The narrative did not change, the posture did. What had been an evidence file became an allegation under law. Charging papers do a specific job. They do not retell the whole case, they state what prosecutors believe they can prove. Here, the complaint and the probable cause statement align with the core record already built, an approach onto the driveway on Morrell Avenue, a low-speed contact with Brazen Cane, and multiple rounds fired in 2 bursts separated by a short pause. Investigators documented approximately 21.40 caliber casings in 2 clusters. Neighborhood surveillance captured the sequence of approach, firing, reload cadence, and departure. Witness interviews, conducted with standard procedures, identified a known acquaintance of the victim. Family members reported phone calls immediately after the incident in which a man acknowledged responsibility and spoke of harming himself. The documents list these items as allegations, each backed by a citation to police reports and preserved media. Missouri's first-degree murder requires proof the killing was committed knowingly, after deliberation. In practice, prosecutors use timing and behavior to show deliberation, the pause for a reload, the continued firing, the controlled departure, because deliberation does not require hours of planning. It can be formed in moments. Armed criminal action attaches when a felony is carried out with a weapon. The state does not need to prove brand or model to file ACA, caliber and conduct are sufficient at this stage. The filings also note the victim's pregnancy, a fact already in the investigative record and relevant for context and possible sentencing considerations, though the counts listed on August 8 center on the homicide. The charging decision locks in the case's legal frame but leaves the presumption intact. A criminal complaint is not a verdict. The language inside it, defended, knowingly, after deliberation, is the state's theory, not the court's ruling. That distinction matters for audiences as much as for juries. A careful narrative honors the presumption without softening what the records say. Custody details are included in brief. After the homicide, law enforcement located Dawkins outside Jackson County, consistent with our earlier timeline placing a person of interest under hold after coordination with another agency. The filings reflect that transfer into county custody for prosecution. If bond status or first appearance notes are available, they're added as calendar facts, arraignment, counsel notation, and routine scheduling. Nothing in the document speculates about motive. Prosecutors keep their focus on sequence, identity, and state of mind as shown by X. What changes for the audience with this step is the clarity of names and counts. The state is now on the record that the person they believe drove onto that driveway and fired those rounds is Arrell Dawkins, and the person killed is Brazen Cane. The filings also show how the parts you've already seen, video timing, reload gap, casing geometry, and phone activity, translate into legal language. Evidence becomes elements, approach and impact address causation, 2 bursts and a pause speak to deliberation, a handgun and ammunition meet the weapon prong for ACA. The strongest cases aren't the ones with the most dramatic wording, they're the ones where each sentence in the complaint can point to a bagged item, a clock, or a sworn statement. One human line belongs here, kept simple, filings are paper, but for a family they mark the first official acknowledgement that what they lived through has a name and a case number. From this point forward, updates happen in courtrooms and on dockets. The record does not chase rumor, it builds toward proof. With charges filed, the case shifts from collecting pieces to proving how those pieces fit. The record now reads like a clean grid. First lane, the Morel Avenue doorbell video, approach at a shallow angle, a brief contact with brazen cane, 2 bursts of gunfire separated by a short pause, controlled departure. Second lane, the scene itself, approximately 21.40 caliber casings in 2 tight clusters that mirror the video's cadence. Third lane, the medical examiner's preliminary findings, which align injuries into 2 phases consistent with a reload gap rather than a random spray. These 3 lanes don't rely on memory or motive. They speak in seconds, angles, and wounds. Next comes the human corroboration that doesn't try to do more than it can. Neighbors describe a dark pickup easing in, lights sweeping the fence, and a driver who seemed to know the space. A photographic lineup is conducted under standard rules. A witness identifies a known acquaintance of the victim. Alone, that's thin. Placed beside video and casings, it gains weight. The same discipline applies to digital traces. Family members report calls immediately after the shooting, an acknowledgement of responsibility and talk of self-harm. Times are logged, and those times sit neatly beside the camera's last flash and the moments a truck would have cleared the block. When witnesses, clocks, and cameras harmonize, a jury can follow without being asked to imagine anything. The vehicle story is careful by design. Tire impressions at the driveway throat are photographed and cast. They support turn-in angle and a steady exit, but they do not, by themselves, identify a specific truck. Investigators don't overclaim. If a vehicle is later seized, tread characteristics and track widths will be compared against these casts. Until then, the report says only what the ground can prove, a practiced approach and a clean line out. Telephony records are treated the same way. Subscriber info and tower activity place a device in the general area. That is not GPS, it narrows, it does not pinpoint. What makes it persuasive is synchronization, tower windows that overlap with the video's muzzle flashes and the second burst's closing frames, followed by the call's relatives describe. It's the sequence that matters: movement, gunfire, departure, phone traffic. A strong case also lists what it doesn't have. The filings do not confirm a firearm recovery in the public record. Plate readability on the primary video is limited. Some private cameras on nearby corridors overrode clips before requests could be served. None of those gaps break the spine of the case, but each one is acknowledged so defense counsel doesn't get to make them look like hidden weaknesses later. The same goes for motive. The state doesn't need to explain why to prove who and how. Recent relationship context and pregnancy establish risk. The elements are carried by conduct. One more line belongs here, short and honest. Families move through this stage with the weight of paperwork and the rhythm of hearings. They need the record to be solid, not sensational. That's why the matrix stays spare, each box checked by a bagged item, a time code, or a sworn statement. When a case can be told in that language, it can be tested the same way. By the end of this phase, the picture is stable. Video, casings, wound sequencing, lineup identification, admission calls, and custody all point in one direction. The unknowns are marked, not brushed aside. It's the kind of file that doesn't need adjectives to hold attention. It needs the next court date. After the filings on August 8, 2025, the case left the lawn on Morel Avenue and entered the court calendar. From here, progress is measured by hearings, discovery deadlines, and motions, not rumor. Prosecutors charged Darrell Dawkins with first-degree murder and armed criminal action in Kansas City, Missouri. He is presumed innocent unless and until the state proves otherwise. As of October 27, 2025, there is no verdict in the public record. That is the status, clear, singular, and consistent with everything you've heard. What happens next is procedural but vital. Original video stays preserved, working copies go to the defense. Ballistics, scene logs, and interviews are exchanged under discovery rules. Any exculpatory material must be disclosed. Chain of custody is the backbone now, because trials test whether evidence is exactly what was collected. The court will decide what comes in, what stays out, and when a jury can hear it. A disciplined narrative respects those boundaries. Identity, causation, and state of mind will be proven, if they are proven, under oath. Community impact is noted without dramatics. Brazen Kane was a teacher, a mother of 5, and pregnant. Friends, co-workers, and neighbors have responded in the most practical ways: rides, meals, childcare, because real support is logistics, not headlines. If you or someone you know is navigating intimate partner danger, use local advocates and court clerks who can explain orders of protection. In an emergency, call 911. That isn't moralizing, it's how people stay safe while the court does its work. There are acknowledged gaps that do not rewrite the case. Public documents do not confirm a firearm recovery. License plate detail on the primary clip is limited. Some corridor cameras overrode footage before requests arrived. Strong files list the unknowns plainly and let the proven pieces carry weight. Here, those pieces have been presented once, without repetition, and they stand where the record places them. So this is where we pause, not because the story has 2 paths, but because it has one. A homicide on August 6, 2025. A defendant named on August 8, 2025. A case pending in Jackson County. No alternate endings, no switch of cities, no change of victim. When the court issues a lawful update, the narrative continues. Until then, the facts are fixed. Justice moves slower than fear and faster than rumor, and that's by design. I'll leave you with this: justice is a process, not a headline. When violence hits a family, the rest of us have work: check on neighbors, learn warning signs, speak up, and use the systems built to keep people safe. If you're in danger, call 911. If you're unsure, ask a local advocate to help you plan safely. What did this case push you to consider? Timing, bystander action, or gaps your town can close? Tell me where you're watching from. If this resonated, please subscribe. If it didn't, say why. Your feedback helps us cover these lives with care and accuracy.